Save me and I'll give you pleasure," she begged. The rancher agreed, until he collapsed. The rancher had always been a man of routine. Every morning he would wake before the sun, the soft glow of dawn barely touching the horizon, and step out into the crisp air of his ranch. The smell of hay and the faint scent of livestock greeted him like old friends. His days were long, filled with feeding the animals, mending fences, checking on the crops, and maintaining the large stretches of land that had been in his family for generations. Life was simple, predictable, and, in a way, comforting. He liked it that way. The world beyond the hills of his ranch was often noisy, chaotic, and confusing. He had learned to value peace, hard work, and solitude over anything else. But that particular day was unlike any other. The sun had climbed higher than usual, spilling golden light over the hills, making the cattle's coats shine as they wandered lazily in the pasture. The rancher had decided to check the northern boundary of his property, where the land dipped into a small valley with rocky paths and uneven soil. He mounted his old horse, a sturdy animal named Dusty, and began the ride along the narrow trails, the sound of hooves echoing softly against the stones. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers and dust, and the rancher felt the usual calm settle over him as he breathed deeply, letting the rhythm of the ride soothe his mind. Suddenly a voice pierced the calm. At first he thought it was the wind carrying the sounds of the distant trees, but then it became clear. It was human. A sharp, desperate cry that made his heart skip a beat. He paused, listening intently, trying to locate the source. It was coming from the direction of the small valley, near the creek where the path became slippery and narrow.
The rancher frowned. Not many people ventured that far, especially not alone.
Curious, and sensing that someone might be in danger, he urged Dusty forward, carefully making his way down the rocky slope. As he reached the bottom, the sight that greeted him was startling. A young woman stood beside a car that had clearly skidded off the trail and was now stuck, its wheels spinning helplessly in the mud. She was trembling, her hair damp with sweat and perhaps tears, and her clothes were smudged with dirt.
Eee!
She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with fear and desperation.
"Please help me," she called, her voice quivering.
"I don't know what to do. Please, I'm begging you." The rancher pulled Dusty to a halt, assessing the situation quickly. The car was wedged at an awkward angle, and trying to move it without proper equipment could be dangerous. Still, he could see that she needed immediate help. Breathe. He dismounted, walking carefully toward the vehicle, keeping his tone calm.
"It's all right," he said.
Oh. I'll help you! Don't worry!
Breaths, she rushed toward him, stopping just short, as if afraid to get too close.
Oh!
"Thank you," she exclaimed. I didn't know who else to call. I've been stuck here for hours and my phone barely has signal." Her voice carried panic, but there was also something else, an edge of desperation that went beyond just being stranded. The rancher didn't comment on it. He simply nodded and started examining the situation. The mud around the car was thick and sticky, the kind that seemed to hold onto anything that touched it. He looked around and found a sturdy branch and some rocks, thinking they might help him stabilize the vehicle. The woman watched him, her eyes anxious but hopeful. "I can help too," she said, stepping closer. "I can..."
"I can do whatever you tell me." The rancher considered this for a moment.
He wasn't used to having anyone assist him in such situations. He usually worked alone, relying on his own strength and skill. But there was no time to hesitate. He nodded, giving her simple instructions. "Hand me that branch." No sudden movements. "Keep your footing," bait. She obeyed immediately, her hands shaking slightly as she passed him the makeshift tool. Hours seemed to pass as they worked together. The rancher directed her carefully, using the horse and the branch to try to free the car's wheels from the mud. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them, making the air thick and heavy. Breath. Every now and then the rancher would glance at her, noting the exhaustion etched on her face, the sweat dripping from her brow, and the way she kept biting her lip as if holding back tears. Breath. She wasn't just frightened. She was scared in a way that spoke of loneliness and helplessness. He didn't ask questions. He simply focused on the task, keeping her calm and giving clear directions. At one point, she stopped and looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. If you save me, I can make it worth your while. There was a strange tension in her words, a promise wrapped in desperation. Breath. The rancher raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. He had heard desperate people say many things, sometimes irrationally, but he kept his eyes on the car. Right now, he said finally. Just stay calm and help me get this out. That's enough. Despite his words, the woman's anxiety seemed to heighten. She nodded quickly, her hands gripping the tools tightly. I'll do whatever you need. Just... Please, don't leave me here, she pleaded. They continued their efforts, working in near silence except for the occasional instruction and her quiet sobs. The rancher's face was set, muscles straining as he pushed and maneuvered, using every bit of strength and experience he had. Finally, with a sudden jerk and a loud slosh, the car shifted, rolling slightly toward firmer ground. Relief washed over both of them. The woman let out a shaky laugh, a mix of joy and exhaustion. You did it! You actually did it! She cried. The rancher gave a small, tired smile, brushing sweat from his forehead.
It's all right now, he said. You're safe. For a moment, the woman's expression softened, the desperation fading into gratitude.
But then, a flicker of worry returned to her eyes as she realized just how much the rancher had exerted himself under the scorching sun. He had pushed hard, without a break, to help her, and the physical toll was becoming evident. His steps were slower, and his face was pale beneath the dirt and sweat. She noticed it, but before she could speak, he straightened, shaking his head slightly.
I'm fine, he said firmly, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. Even as they prepared to move away from the car and head toward safer ground, the tension of the day had already begun to wear on them both.
The rancher had faced many challenges in his life, but helping a stranger in this kind of desperate situation tested more than his strength. It tested his patience, his focus, and his endurance. For the woman, the experience was equally intense, revealing her vulnerability and the reliance on someone she barely knew. And so, as the sun began its slow descent casting long shadows over the valley, the two of them stood there, surrounded by the beauty and danger of the rugged landscape. The rancher's eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the area, while the woman, her chest rising and falling with relief, silently thanked the man who had risked his own safety to help her. Neither knew what the next moments would bring, but in that shared struggle, a bond had quietly begun.
One born out of fear, courage, and the unexpected connection of two strangers thrown together by fate.
After the car was finally freed, the rancher helped the woman steady herself. She was still trembling, her legs weak from the long hours of fear and exertion. The rancher guided her toward a flatter patch of land near the creek, where the ground was more solid and they could both take a moment to catch their breath. Dusty, the rancher's horse, grazed quietly nearby, flicking its tail at the occasional fly, oblivious to the tension in the human world.
The rancher leaned against a tree, wiping sweat from his forehead, and glanced at the woman.
Her expression was a mixture of relief and lingering panic, her breathing shallow but more controlled.
"You're going to be okay now," he said, trying to reassure her.
Just rest for a moment. Don't try to move too fast.
She nodded, sinking onto the grass.
Bray, shh. I don't even know your name, she admitted quietly. Her voice was hoarse from shouting and crying. I was so scared. I thought... I didn't know if anyone would come. The rancher sat down a few feet away, his hands resting on his knees. Inspiration. I'm called Mark, he said. And you? Amy, she whispered, looking down at her hands, which were smudged with dirt. Amy. Carter. Mark studied her quietly, noticing the worry lines on her forehead and the tension in her shoulders. She looked much younger than he had expected, though there was a strength in her eyes, a determination that belied her current panic. Amy, he repeated softly. You handled a difficult situation. You stayed calm enough to listen and follow instructions. That counts for something. She managed a faint smile but didn't say anything. The sun had climbed high in the sky and the heat was beginning to press down on them again. Mark knew they needed to move carefully, to avoid overexertion, and perhaps to get Amy to a safer place where she could recover fully. But before they could leave, she suddenly spoke again, her voice shaky and urgent. Breaths.
I need to tell you something, she said. She looked at him, her eyes wide, almost pleading.
If you help me, if you save me completely, I can make it worth your while. Mark froze for a moment, taken aback by her words. They carried a strange tension, a suggestion he wasn't expecting, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had dealt with desperate people before, though rarely in such isolated circumstances. Right now, he said firmly, the important thing is that you're safe. That's enough for me. Amy bit her lip and nodded, though the worry didn't leave her eyes. I know, she said softly, but I'm scared. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come. I don't want to owe anyone like this. I want to survive today. Mark let out a slow breath, acknowledging the honesty in her words. Survival was a basic instinct, after all, and in moments like these, people often said things they didn't fully mean. He didn't judge her. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, making sure she could leave the valley safely, and that neither of them would be hurt in the process. He rose to his feet and extended a hand toward her. Come on! We need to get out of this valley. It's not safe to linger here for long. The sun is hot, and it's easy to lose your footing in this terrain.
Amy took his hand, and together they began the slow, careful climb up the slope.
The mud from the earlier struggle still clung to her boots, making each step heavier. Mark kept a close eye on her, adjusting his pace so that she wouldn't fall. They moved in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of boots on loose soil, the distant call of birds, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As they walked, Amy's panic began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity. She glanced at Mark occasionally, trying to read him, to understand the man who had come to her aid without hesitation. You live out here all alone? She asked finally. Mark nodded.
Yes, my family's ranch has been here for generations.
I take care of the land, the livestock, and everything in between. It's hard work, but it's honest. And I like it that way. Amy's eyes widened slightly. It must be peaceful, but also lonely, I guess. Sometimes, Mark admitted. But I'm used to it. Solitude gives me time to think, to focus on what matters. breaths people, well, they can be complicated. She nodded slowly, seeming to understand. I've always been surrounded by people, but I've never felt understood. Being out here, even for a little while, it's strange how quiet it feels. Almost comforting, in a way. Mark gave a faint smile but said nothing. He could sense the vulnerability in her words. Desperation. There was more to Amy than what she had shown in the mud-stuck car. Her desperation earlier had been about survival, yes, but it had also hinted at struggles beyond the immediate danger. He respected her silence, knowing she would share more if she trusted him. They reached a flatter area where the path widened, and Mark suggested they take a short break. He noticed her shivering slightly, despite the warmth of the sun, and offered her a bottle of water he always carried in his saddlebag. She gratefully accepted it, taking small sips as she tried to regain her strength. "Thank you," she murmured after a few moments. "I don't know how to repay you for all this. I feel, I don't know, indebted." Mark shook his head. "Don't think like that." Burst. "Helping someone in danger is the right thing to do. There's no need for repayment." Bran. For a few minutes they sat in silence, listening to the quiet of the valley. It was a rare calm, the kind that made even someone used to solitude pause and take notice. The hills. Amy's gaze wandered to the hills, to the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and finally to Mark, whose presence had been a lifeline just hours before. Barrett.
After the pause, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, less urgent.
Been running from a lot of things lately. Problems at work, personal stuff. I didn't think anyone would even notice if I disappeared. I didn't mean to put anyone in danger. I panicked.
Mark nodded, understanding.
Fear could make anyone act irrationally. "It's human to panic," he said. "What matters is that you didn't give up completely. You stayed alive. That's important." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. You're different from anyone I've met," she said softly. "You didn't judge me. You just helped. I don't know why, but I feel grateful in a way I can't explain." Mark looked away briefly, focused on keeping his footing on the uneven path. "Sometimes people help simply because it's the right thing to do. No other reason needed." Amy nodded, her voice small but sincere. I hope I can be like that someday. Someone who helps others without expecting anything back." The rancher didn't respond immediately, but he felt a quiet satisfaction in her words. It was rare to meet someone who understood the value of genuine help. Most people either took it for granted or misunderstood the intention. Here, in this valley, amidst mud, sweat, and fear, there was clarity. They continued their slow trek out of the valley, the car left behind but the memory of its struggle lingering. Mark occasionally glanced back to ensure Amy was still following, noting the way she adjusted her pace to match his, trying to show that she was capable, that she could be relied upon. It was a subtle display of trust, and he acknowledged it quietly in his mind. By the time they reached a small clearing near the edge of the ranch, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the hills. Amy's exhaustion was evident, but there was also relief, a sense of accomplishment mixed with gratitude. Breath. She stopped, taking a deep breath, finally allowing herself to relax fully. Mark dismounted Dusty, brushing the horse's coat as he surveyed the area. The ranch had never seemed so welcoming as it did in that moment, the fences and barns promising safety, stability, and rest. Amy followed him, her steps slower now, but with a steadier rhythm, a small smile playing on her lips. Burse. I think I can breathe again, she said softly, almost to herself. Thank you. Truly. Mark nodded, his expression unreadable but gentle. Psh, you're welcome. Now let's get you cleaned up and out of those wet clothes. Bed.
You've had a long day and it's not over yet. But you'll be safe here.
For the first time in hours, Amy allowed herself to feel hope. The valley had been a place of fear and desperation, but now it was also a place of trust, of kindness, and of connection. And though neither of them realized it yet, the events of this day would leave a lasting mark, shaping their thoughts and actions in ways neither could have predicted. By the time they reached the small clearing near the edge of the ranch, the sun had started its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cooler now, but the rancher could still feel the exhaustion in his muscles. His arms ached from the hours of lifting and pulling the car, and his legs were stiff from maintaining balance on the uneven terrain. Yet he didn't let it show, knowing Amy depended on him to get her out safely. Breaths. She walked beside him, her steps still uncertain, her hands gripping her jacket tightly, as if holding herself together. Mark guided her toward the main barn, where they could find water and a place to rest. Dusty followed closely behind, his hooves crunching against the gravel path. The rancher had built the barn sturdy enough to weather storms, and it stood now as a symbol of safety after the chaos of the day. Amy paused at the entrance, glancing around with cautious relief. It looks solid, she said, a small smile breaking through her fatigue. Mark chuckled softly, a rare sound that hinted at warmth. It's been here longer than either of us can count. Nothing gets in without permission, and nothing leaves without warning. His attempt at humor made her smile faintly, and for a moment the tension between them eased. Inside the barn, they found a stack of hay bales near the corner and a wooden bench nearby. Stay.
Mark gestured toward them. Sit here.
Catch your breath. I'll get some water for both of us. Belly. Amy nodded, sinking onto the hay bales gratefully. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees and taking slow, steadying breaths. Her face was flushed, and her hands shook slightly. The relief of being in a safe place after hours of fear and exertion was beginning to hit her. Mark filled 2 metal cups with cool water from a large jug he kept in the barn. He handed one to Amy and took the other himself. They drank quietly, the only sounds being the occasional clink of metal against wood and the soft breathing of Dusty. Mark noticed how fragile she seemed, how much she had pushed herself to get through the day. Bah. Her eyes met his for a moment, filled with gratitude and a hint of something unspoken.
You really saved me, she said quietly, her voice almost reverent.
I don't know how I could have done it alone. I wouldn't have. Bay. Mark shrugged lightly, trying to appear casual, though inside he felt the weight of fatigue pressing down. You did your part. You followed directions, stayed calm enough to listen. That helped more than you know. For a while they sat in silence, each lost in thought. The barn was quiet except for the soft rustling of hay as Dusty shifted his weight. Amy's gaze wandered to the beams above, to the sunlight streaming through the small windows, and finally back to Mark. There was something about his presence that was grounding, steady, and reliable, qualities she hadn't realized she craved until this moment. After a few minutes, Mark stood, stretching his arms and legs to loosen the stiffness. The exertion of the day was catching up to him, more than he had allowed himself to admit. We should probably get you cleaned up, he said. There's a small wash area near the back. You can rinse off the mud and dirt. It'll make you feel better. Amy nodded and followed him, her steps still cautious. As they approached the wash area, she realized just how much she had underestimated the effort it took to survive out here. The rancher's life was hard, demanding, and relentless, and yet he had faced her emergency without hesitation, without complaint. She felt a deep respect for him, mixed with an odd sense of admiration. Mark turned the spigot, and cool water flowed into the basin. Amy knelt, dipping her hands and splashing her face, trying to wash away the mud and sweat of the day. Mark worked quietly beside her, washing his own hands, but he could feel the strain of the day catching up. His breathing was heavier than usual, and a dull ache spread across his chest and shoulders. He ignored it, focusing on helping Amy regain some comfort after the harrowing ordeal.
Amy looked up at him, sensing something off in his movements.
Are you okay? She asked tentatively, her concern clear in her voice. Mark waved her off with a faint smile. Desperation. I'm fine. Just tired. That's all. Long day, lots of work, nothing more. But even as he spoke, a sharp dizziness swept over him. He steadied himself against the edge of the basin, blinking rapidly. Amy noticed immediately and stepped closer. You don't look fine, she said, her voice rising slightly in panic. Breaths. You're pale. You're shaking. You're shaking. Pass. Are you hurt? Mark shook his head, trying to calm her. No, it's nothing. I just need a moment. Desperation. He took a deep breath, hoping the feeling would pass. But it didn't. Instead, his legs suddenly felt heavy, his vision blurred at the edges, and the cool water of the basin did little to steady him. He leaned forward instinctively, gripping the basin, trying to keep his balance. Amy reacted instantly, her earlier exhaustion forgotten. Balk! Sit down. You're going to hurt yourself. She reached for him, but before she could help him, his knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. The impact was jarring, and Amy's heart leapt into her throat. Mark! She shouted, rushing to his side. Panic overtook her, replacing the exhaustion she had felt earlier. She knelt beside him, checking for signs of serious injury, her hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. Breath! Don't you dare pass out on me! Mark groaned weakly, his face pale and slick with sweat. Brace. I'm okay, he muttered, but his voice was faint, lacking the usual strength and firmness she had seen all day. Amy's mind raced. The rancher had saved her earlier, risking his own safety without hesitation. And now he needed her help. She realized the gravity of the situation. The man who had seemed so invincible, so steady, was vulnerable and human. She could see the strain etched across his face, the sweat glistening on his forehead, and the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Thinking quickly, she checked the nearby barn for anything that could help. She found a clean blanket and gently wrapped it around him, trying to keep him warm. You're going to be fine, she said, her voice steadying despite her fear. Just hang on. You've helped me enough today. Let me help you now. Mark tried to speak again, to reassure her, but the words failed him. The exhaustion, the heat, the exertion, it had all caught up at once. His breathing was uneven, and for the first time he was completely dependent on someone else. Amy held his hand firmly, refusing to let go, her mind working to keep him conscious and calm. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, her heart hammering in her chest. Dusty nickered softly, sensing the tension, and rubbed his nose against the barn door. Amy spoke to Mark constantly, keeping him focused. Look at me, Mark. You're strong. Breath. You've been through worse than this. Just breathe. First, just stay awake for me. Slowly, Mark's breathing steadied, the worst of the dizziness passing. Though he remained weak and pale, Amy let out a small sigh of relief, though she didn't release his hand. That's it, she said gently. You're okay now. Just rest. You've earned it. For the first time that day, the rancher allowed himself to fully acknowledge the toll of the events. He realized how much he had pushed his body to its limits in order to help a stranger. And he realized how much trust he had placed in her in a short span of hours. Bration to care and responsibility, showing him that help could go both ways, and that vulnerability didn't make one weak. It made one human. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the barn floor, the two of them remained there, one recovering from exhaustion, the other guarding and assisting, bound by the events that had unfolded in the valley. The encounter had begun as a desperate plea for help, but it had evolved into something deeper, a shared understanding of courage, trust, and human fragility. Neither spoke for a while, letting the quiet of the barn absorb the tension. The air smelled of hay and the faint musk of Dusty, but it was comforting now, grounding them both.
Amy adjusted the blanket around Mark, feeling a strange mix of relief and gratitude.
She had survived the day, yes, but now she had been given the chance to give back, to care for someone who had selflessly saved her life. And in that quiet, still moment, they both understood something unspoken. The events of the day had left a mark, a reminder of the strength and fragility that coexist in every human being. The rancher had collapsed, but it was not defeat, and Amy had risen to the occasion, showing that even in fear and desperation, people could rise to help one another. Mark lay on the hay, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion he had ignored for hours. Every muscle ached, and his breathing was still uneven, but the worst of the dizziness had passed. He could feel Amy's presence beside him, her hand holding his firmly, her voice occasionally breaking the silence with soft reassurances. He tried to speak, to tell her he was okay, but each word came out hoarse, strained by fatigue.
Amy's concern deepened as she realized just how much he had pushed himself.
You've been through too much today, she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. You need to rest properly.
Shar. No more trying to act strong. You saved me. But now it's your turn to let someone take care of you. Mark managed a faint smile, appreciating her words even though he felt too weak to respond fully. He was not used to being in a position where he relied on someone else. For years, he had been the one people turned to in times of trouble. He had faced storms, wild animals, equipment failures, and countless challenges on the ranch alone. But yet now he felt the humbling weight of being human. Fallible, vulnerable, and in need of help. Amy adjusted the blanket around him, tucking it carefully beneath his shoulders to keep him warm. She glanced at him, noticing the lines of strain on his face, the sweat still dampening his hair, and the way his hands trembled slightly. Her heart ached for him. A stranger she had only met hours ago, yet who had risked everything to save her life. You're human too, you know, she said softly, almost to herself.
Even heroes get tired.
Mark closed his eyes briefly, letting the words sink in. They were not just comforting. They were true. He had always carried the weight of responsibility, the expectation to be unyielding and strong. But in this moment, he allowed himself to feel the fatigue, the vulnerability, and even a hint of relief in being cared for. Amy's concern was genuine, not tied to obligation or fear. and that made it easier to accept. As the evening shadows lengthened across the barn, Amy continued to stay by his side. Brace. She fetched a small basin of cool water, using it to gently wipe the sweat from his face and neck. Mark remained still, letting her actions guide him toward recovery. It was a strange reversal of roles. He who had rescued her, now dependent on her attention and care. She didn't complain, didn't show hesitation, only acted with quiet determination, as if she understood that her actions mattered in a way words could not convey. You should sit up a little, Amy suggested, helping him slowly into a more comfortable position against the hay bales. Just a little.
Breath. It'll help your circulation.
Mark obeyed, feeling the strain in every movement.
He hated the weakness, hated the dependency, but he trusted her. There was no judgment in her eyes, only concern and focus. It was a relief, even a comfort, to be in the presence of someone who didn't expect him to be invincible. Once he was seated more comfortably, Amy paused for a moment, studying him, breaths. I can't imagine what it's like to carry all this responsibility, she said quietly. I mean, you do everything alone. You save people, take care of the ranch, and still keep going. And yet, you're still brand. Human. Fragile. In a way. Mark chuckled softly, despite himself. That's the truth most people don't see. They see the work, the results, the strength, but they rarely see the exhaustion, the nights you spend thinking about what could go wrong, or the mistakes you avoid at the last second. People forget we're human first, not just providers or heroes. Amy nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think I understand that now. After today, I see how much effort it takes to help someone else. It's not just strength, it's patience, judgment, and sacrifice. I never realized that before. For a moment they sat in silence, the barn bathed in the soft fading light of the sunset, Dusty nickered softly nearby, the gentle sound grounding them in the reality of the quiet evening. Amy continued to hold Mark's hand, not letting go, as if keeping him tethered to the present. I was so desperate back there, she admitted finally. I didn't think anyone would come. And yet you did. You didn't hesitate. You just helped. That's more than I can ever repay. Breath. Mark shook his head slightly. You don't owe me anything. What matters is that you're safe. That's enough. Bravers.
Amy's eyes softened. It's not just that, she said quietly.
It's that you trust me now. You allowed me to help you, even though I'm a stranger. That means something too. It shows that kindness can be mutual, not just one-sided. Mark nodded slowly, considering her words.
It was true. He had let go of his pride and allowed someone else to care for him, if only for a short while.
Bray. And in doing so, he had learned something important. Vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was human. And sometimes it was the bridge that allowed people to connect genuinely without expectation or judgment. Amy adjusted the blanket around him again, her movements careful and deliberate. You're going to be okay, she said. But you need to rest properly tonight. No more pushing yourself until you're recovered. I can't handle seeing you collapse again. Mark let out a quiet laugh, a sound that was a mix of exhaustion and amusement. Desperate. You're serious, aren't you?
I am, she replied firmly. I've seen how strong you are.
but even the strongest people need help.
And I'll be here until you're better. Consider it my turn to repay the favor. For the first time that evening, Mark allowed himself to fully relax. He leaned back against the hay, letting the warmth of the barn and the blanket soothe his sore muscles. Amy stayed by his side, her presence calming, her concern tangible but not overbearing. It was a strange comfort to be cared for by someone who had just been saved by him, yet who now offered her strength in return. As the night drew closer, the temperature dropped slightly, and Amy suggested they move into the smaller storage room attached to the barn, where she could lay out clean blankets and pillows. Mark agreed, grateful for the idea. With her help, he slowly moved to the room, sitting carefully on a pile of blankets. Amy arranged them around him, creating a makeshift bed, and sat nearby, keeping a watchful eye. Brit.
You need sleep, she said softly. Your body is telling you that it's time to recover.
You can't keep going like this forever.
Mark nodded, feeling the exhaustion weigh heavier than ever. I know, he admitted quietly.
Breaths. I've been ignoring it all day. I just didn't want to stop until you were safe. Breaths. Amy smiled faintly. And now I'm safe. So it's time for you to stop. They remained there for a while, the quiet of the barn settling around them like a protective blanket. Amy occasionally spoke in soft tones, telling small stories or observations about her life, keeping the atmosphere calm and light, but past-focused, half drifting toward sleep. The warmth of her voice, the simple act of caring, helped ease the tension in his body and mind. As he began to relax, he reflected on the events of the day, the desperation, the fear, the effort, and now the quiet understanding. He realized that the bond between them had deepened in just a few hours. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, empathy, and the unexpected strength found in human connection. Amy had shown him that caring could be reciprocal, that vulnerability could be shared without judgment, and that true strength often came from letting someone else help when needed. Amy watched him quietly, noting how his breathing had slowed, how his face had softened in relief, and how the tension in his body had eased. She felt a sense of accomplishment, not just for surviving, but for being able to support someone who had given so much to save her. It was a profound realization. In helping him recover, she was also growing stronger, more compassionate, and more aware of the value of empathy. As the night deepened, the barn grew darker, the only light coming from the small lantern Amy had lit break. Shadows danced along the walls, and the quiet sounds of dusty shifting or the occasional creak of wood filled the space. In that stillness, both of them found a sense of peace that had eluded them for much of the day. The struggle had passed, but the lessons remained, woven into the fabric of their experience together. Mark finally closed his eyes, allowing sleep to take him fully. Amy remained by his side, vigilant and caring, her hand resting lightly on his arm. In that moment, the hardships of the day, the exhaustion, and the vulnerability all felt worth it. They had faced fear, danger, and the limits of their strength, and had come through together stronger in understanding and trust. By morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered gently through the barn's small windows, casting a soft glow on the hay and the floor. Mark had slept deeply through the night, his exhaustion finally giving way to rest. His body ached less than the previous day, and his breathing was steady. Amy sat nearby, quietly tending to Dusty and arranging a fresh basin of water. She had stayed awake most of the night, making sure he remained comfortable, but she felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing him rest peacefully. The events of the day and night had changed both of them, leaving an impression that neither would forget. Mark stirred, blinking against the sunlight as he slowly became aware of his surroundings. He realized immediately that Amy had stayed by his side, and a wave of gratitude washed over him.
He had expected to be alone again, as he often was, but her presence reminded him that help and kindness could come from unexpected places.
Morning, he said quietly, his voice still soft from sleep. Amy smiled gently. Good morning. You slept well. Finally. I thought I'd make sure everything was ready for the day. Food, water, and a little breakfast. You've earned it. Mark sat up slowly, careful not to strain himself. He stretched his arms, the tension in his muscles still noticeable but easing gradually. Desk. Thank you, he said simply. I didn't expect anyone to stay. You didn't have to. Amy shook her head, her expression earnest. I wanted to. After everything yesterday, after how you helped me, I felt like I owed you more than words could express. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly people can connect when they're pushed to the edge. Mark nodded, reflecting on her words. It was indeed strange, but he understood it now more than ever. Life had a way of bringing people together in unexpected moments, moments that revealed courage, trust, and humanity in its purest form. Yes, he said softly. You're right. I've met many people in my life, but not all leave a mark. You have. Amy blushed slightly, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't anticipated. Breath. I hope it's a good mark, she said with a faint laugh. Not one of annoyance or worry. Mark chuckled. The sound light and genuine. Definitely a good one, he said. You reminded me that helping someone doesn't just impact them, it changes you too. They spent the next hour in quiet preparation. Mark moved carefully, still cautious not to overexert himself, while Amy gathered supplies from the barn and the small storage area. Together they set up a modest breakfast, warm bread, a bit of cheese, and fresh water from the well. It was simple, but it had a comforting quality, a reminder that life could be calm and nurturing after chaos. They ate in silence at first, allowing the warmth of the morning and the peaceful barn to settle over them. Finally, Amy spoke, her voice thoughtful. You know, before yesterday, I never realized how much effort it takes to care for a ranch. You handle everything alone, and yet you seem calm, steady. How do you do it? Mark paused, considering her question. It's not always easy, he admitted. There are days I feel like giving up, days when the weight of responsibility is almost too much. But I keep going because it's worth it, because I value the life I've built here, and because I know someone has to care for this land and the animals. It's about commitment, and sometimes about love for what you do. Amy nodded, impressed and thoughtful. I think I understand now. Life isn't just about what happens to you. It's about what you choose to do in response.
You could have ignored me yesterday, but you didn't. You chose to act even when it was hard.
Mark smiled faintly. And you chose to act too. Oh, you stayed, helped, and cared. That's what makes people remarkable. We had the chance to rise to the moment, to be better than our fears or doubts.
Their conversation drifted to lighter topics after that. Stories from Amy's life, her work, and her experiences growing up in the city.
Pat. Mark shared tales of the ranch, of storms that had tested him, and of animals with personalities that often rivaled humans. They laughed, shared small frustrations, and found comfort in the easy rhythm of shared conversation. It was a rare connection, one born from necessity but nurtured by empathy and understanding. By mid-morning, Mark felt strong enough to consider returning Amy to the edge of the valley where her car still awaited. She had grown more confident in the terrain, but he insisted on guiding her, knowing the dangers of slipping or twisting an ankle on the uneven ground.
I'm fine walking on my own, she said, smiling. But I'd rather have you nearby.
After all, you're my hero for the day. Mark shook his head with amusement.
I'm no hero. I just did what needed to be done.
You can call it bravery, but really it was just survival and common sense. Amy laughed softly. Survival and common sense sounds like a good motto for life. They packed a few essentials, and Mark led her back toward the path that led out of the valley. Dusty walked beside them, calm and steady as always. The morning air was crisp and invigorating, and both of them felt lighter, the tension of the previous day replaced by relief and newfound trust. Along the way they spoke little, letting the quiet rhythm of walking, breathing, and shared presence carry them. When they reached the car, Amy paused to look at it. It was a reminder of the chaos, fear, and desperation of the previous day, yet now it seemed almost distant.
She sighed, half in relief, half in reflection.
It's amazing how something so small, a car stuck in mud, can change everything in a day, she said.
Mark nodded. Yes. Sometimes it's the little things that test us the most, and sometimes it's those moments that teach us the most about who we are and who we can rely on. Bright. Amy smiled at him, a soft, genuine smile. Thank you, Mark. Britt, not just for yesterday, but for today, too. For letting me see how strength and kindness can exist together. I won't forget it! Mark felt a warmth in his chest at her words. You don't have to thank me, boss. You've already done more than enough. By trusting, by staying calm, by being human. That's enough for anyone.
Bruce. Amy climbed into her car, giving him one last glance before starting the engine.
I'll make sure this car never gets stuck again, she joked lightly, easing the tension.
But I'll never forget the man who saved me, that's for certain.
Bark
Waved, smiling faintly. Take care, Amy. Be careful out there. And remember, breath. Don't forget to let people help when they want to. She nodded, driving slowly down the dirt path while he watched her leave, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. The day had begun with fear and desperation, but it ended with connection, understanding, and respect. Breaths. He returned to the barn, feeling the exhaustion linger but tempered by a sense of accomplishment. The events had reminded him of the value of human connection, of mutual care, and of the unexpected lessons that arise from moments of crisis. As the sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in golden light, Mark reflected on the day. He realized that heroism wasn't about being invincible. It was about acting when it mattered, caring even when it was difficult, and allowing others to care for you in return, And Amy's presence had been a living reminder of that lesson. Strength and vulnerability could coexist, creating bonds that survived beyond fear and chaos. Burst on it. He returned to his daily work on the ranch, but the memory of Amy's gratitude, her laughter, and her empathy remained with him, and somewhere in the city, Amy carried with her a newfound understanding of trust, courage, and the importance of human kindness. The encounter had changed both of them, leaving an indelible mark. A story of survival, empathy, and the quiet power of two people helping each other when it mattered most. And though their paths might never cross again, the day would always remain vivid in their minds. The day when fear and desperation met courage and care, when a stranger became a lifeline, and when both learned that the simplest acts of kindness could leave the deepest impressions on a person's life.